All right, everyone, welcome to our One Thing monthly webinar. Every month, we sit down with a best-selling author, someone whose book we think would bring value to you and is aligned with the principles of the One Thing. And that's exactly what we are doing today. The person that you are staring at is a New York Times best-selling author. He's the author of the brand new book, Back to Human, How Great Leaders Create Connections in the Age of Isolation. I was looking at the wrong line. Back to Human, How Great Leaders Create Connection in the Age of Isolation. He's the host of 5 Questions with Dan Schawbel, and he's a partner and research director at Future Workplace. So he studies organizational behavior, technology at work, the future of work. So you can see how the dominoes are very lined up here. So Dan Schawbel, thank you so much for being with us today.
So happy to be here with you, live from New York City.
Yeah, very nice. Although, do you have trees?
No, there's a reason I don't want to show you the weather outside of my building.
But you know what you do have? You have Levain's cookies. Have you been there?
No, but noted.
Noted. It's won like best cookie in the United States for many years. Imagine a scone, but a cookie. So it's crunchy on the outside, ooey gooey on the inside. It'll change your life. You don't look like you eat cookies.
No.
Oh. Okay, we'll send you some. So let's go back. What got you into doing what you do today?
Well, it's a long story, but to make it short, Back to Human is my third book. Each book I've written helps people get to the next phase of their career. So as I grow and develop, I want to create content and support people as they are living that life and in that phase of their career. So Me 2.0 was College to First Job, Promote Yourself was First Job to Management, and Back to Human is a leadership book. I also started my career really focused on technology, especially social media. I created the first ever social media position at EMC Corporation, one of the first ever Fortune 200 social media positions. So I was heavily involved in social media in the early days of Web 2.0. And I saw social media as a pathway to build your personal brand and elevate your career and or business. And then as I was growing and developing, I realized that all the social media and technology use was really isolating me and making me lonely. So I was like, okay, what can I do about this? How do I forge more connections? And over time, like Promote Yourself was a lot more focused on soft skills. And now with Back to Human, it's like the pendulum swung the other way. And I think that we're overusing and misusing technology, and technology has created the illusion of connection, when in reality, our overuse and misuse of that very technology has made us more isolated, less engaged, and less committed to our teams and organizations. And that's a big problem for our health, because work is a third of our lives. We spend so much of our time doing work and working with our colleagues. So if those relationships aren't strong, it doesn't just hurt our work day, it hurts our entire day and our lives. And so that to me is really important. So I also advise companies on how to create healthier, safe, and more effective workplaces, because if you advise companies and you're a champion and support employees, together you create a better workplace for everyone, so the organization benefits financially so it can grow and innovate, and for individuals to be safe and secure at work, and they're just treated with more respect.
So I'm curious, for the people who are here live, how many of you have ever experienced what Dan was just talking about? Like, technology, even though it connects us to more people than ever before, we sometimes feel more isolated. If so, put me in the questions box. And if not, go ahead and put a question mark. I just want to get a pulse. Lots of me's. Dan, what does the research say on this?
Yeah, we're spending up to half of our workday using technology instead of face-to-face. We're tapping our phones and other devices over 2,600 times a day, looking at our phones every 12 minutes. And during a meeting, we're texting an average of 5 times. So instead of being attentive and connecting and establishing mutual understanding, we're so addicted to our phones and devices that we're immediately turning to technology instead of to a person. We think that technology has all the answers, and technology has created the illusion that we're multitaskers and we're so productive and that we have abundance of friends and connections, when in reality, someone with 150 Facebook friends only has 4 they can rely on at a time of emotional crisis. And there's no such thing as multitasking. Your brain is switching from one task to the other, and it's actually making you less effective. So the goal in today's world is, how do we use technology to eliminate the work we don't want to do, and then as a bridge to more human interaction instead of letting the technology preventing the technology from isolating us so that we can live our true life and establish the relationships we need, not just to do our best work, but for survival in general.
So I want to make this interactive. So for the people who are on here live, I mean, you're here, you're investing your time. This is your webinar. So feel free to put questions in the questions box, and we can feed them to Dan as we go. And I'll keep driving. You know, Dan, I'm curious because you look at the future of work. I'm going to ask you to play fortune teller here a little bit. What's at stake here, really? If we keep going in the direction that we're going, if we fast forward 10, 20, 50 years, what's the consequence?
There's a few things that I'm looking at. One is we've surveyed students before, and 40% of them said that technology is hurting their soft skills. And this was several years ago, so now they're older, and it's not like technology is not hurting their soft skills.
Right.
People are being more isolated and lonely. In the U.S., half of Americans are lonely, 40% lack meaningful relationships. Look at in the UK, 9 million people are lonely. Loneliness costs the UK economy £2.5 billion per year. They have a minister of loneliness there. In Japan,
sounds like a lonely job.
Yeah, in Japan, 30,000 people die a year from loneliness. So it's really, a global epidemic. We did research with Virgin Pulse, a global study of over 2,000 employees and managers in 10 countries, and we found that about 7% of the global workforce has 0 friends at work, half have 5 or fewer. Yet we're spending more time at work. Not having your phone is the new vacation. We're always kind of connected because of our addiction, because of the convenience, because more is being demanded of us as workers, as leaders than previously. And as a result, if we don't have strong relationships, we're less tied to those organizations. It's much easier to leave an organization where you have loose ties and acquaintances versus one where you have relationships, maybe really strong relationships and friends and best friends.
Yeah.
And so I think this is going to become more important in the future. One of the really interesting things is Gen Z, namely teenagers, is the first ever group to say they would rather text over having an in-person communication, meaning that millennials and Gen X and boomers, all other generations, would rather have an in-person conversation than text. But teenagers are the first group that said they would rather text. And I think that's going to make its way into the workplace and make things even more complicated. And so what's really interesting in the study we did with Virgin Pulse, we found that email is the biggest thing that gets in the way of face-to-face communication. Yet a study in the Harvard Business Review found that one face-to-face conversation is more successful than 34 emails exchanged back and forth. So anytime you're sending an email back and forth and the point is not getting across, that should be a signal to you that you might need to pick up the phone or walk over to someone's office because what you're saying is not actionable and it's creating misunderstanding, which is creating more work and is counterproductive.
I love that. That's good. I'm going to want to get that Harvard article from you, by the way. I want to read that one. So I'm curious because we're talking about employee engagement here, and a lot of the people, I'm actually curious, for those of you who are on here live, how many of you are business owners versus a leader in an organization versus employee versus seeking my next opportunity? Let's get a pulse of where you guys stand. And then Kaylin, as these questions come in, can you flag them? Awesome.
She lost you.
Yeah. Okay. So leaders, employee, and a music teacher. Very cool. Business owner, seeking next opportunity. Okay. So here's what I'm interested in, because we've got a lot of people here who are in a leadership position, and we believe even if you're an employee, all leadership starts with self-leadership. So we all have to look inward. What are the factors that really drive employee engagement?
The core 4 factors that drive employee engagement are purpose, trust, belonging, and happiness. Purpose is having a real purpose means that you're not just doing what you did yesterday, that you're driving to something that's more meaningful and that you have a higher purpose for your work, that your work is in service of other people, communities, maybe the world. And so as a leader, you need to have a purpose, first of all, but you need to explain to your employees that the work they're doing impacts others, and you need to make those connections, even if especially if they can't make those connections on their own. So if someone's coming to work and they have certain tasks they have to get done, don't just communicate, hey, can you do these tasks? Explain why they need to do those tasks and how it supports the greater mission and vision of yours or your company as a whole. And that's way more powerful, and that's going to make them much more engaged, because then they'll come to work and be like, oh wow, the work I'm doing here is actually meaningful, it matters, it's going to affect people, and so I have to take this more seriously and work harder on it. That's one. Trust, I think, is huge. I mean,
so hold on real quick. So I'm curious, how many people who are here live feel like you've developed a sense of purpose? Put a yes or a no in the questions box. I'm just curious at this point, because this is something we've been studying on the back end. We may actually write a book on it. It's in consideration. So a lot of people say yes. That's awesome. For those of you, this is something that's a focus for you, if you guys go to theonething.com with the number 1 and you click on free stuff, there's a My Purpose guide that'll ask you certain questions that'll at least set you down the journey to developing a sense of purpose. So Dan, you said purpose, trust, belonging, and happiness. Trust makes sense to me, but what does it look like to actually go about developing a trust between employees?
At a foundational level, no relationship can really exist without trust. That is so core to who we are. If you don't trust your leader, you're just not going to want to work as hard. You're not going to be engaged. You're just not going to last there very long, right? You're not going to want to do your best work. It's going to really take away from your entire employee experience. Trust is the foundation of not just any relationship in the workplace, but any marriage, any boyfriend, girlfriend relationship, any friendship. It is so key. And so how do you instill trust? You just got to be as honest as you possibly can. It's almost like telling employees things that they wouldn't even expect to hear from you. That is what's going to make people trust you more. Like, think about the friends that you have, the ones that really open up and are saying, hey, I'm not good at this, or, the company isn't doing as well, even though it might seem like it is, and here's why. And just being really honest and open and transparent is so key, because then people will trust you more and want to work harder for you. So I think trust is really the cornerstone to employee engagement, because you cannot have purpose, belonging, happiness, but as long as there's trust, that's at least something to keep people wanting to listen to that leader. If the leader can't be trusted, people are just not going to listen to the leader. The leader becomes completely ineffective.
I heard something interesting. Susan Scott wrote a book called Fierce Conversations, and she said the conversation is the relationship. So if you look at the quality of your relationship, and this goes into trust, think about the people that you work with. Are there people that you are afraid just to be fully transparent with, just to lay it out as it is? That's reflective of the relationship itself. And sometimes it's because we care about the person too much. We don't want to hurt their feelings. And I remember she said, too much care creates a dysfunctional relationship, yet too much candor can create a distant relationship. So it's that balance of don't love them so much that you love them straight out of the business, but also bring some candor to the table, but to a level.
Yeah. And then the third factor is belonging. So you want to feel like you belong to a group that's going to support you and your ideas, right? And, this kind of factors into trust and purpose. You belong to a company and a leader that has a higher purpose. You feel like you're part of that team and you're contributing. You trust your leader and the people you work with, so you have a better sense of belongingness. And belonging is important because people who might not look like you or act like you or have opinions like you might be part of your group, and you need to incorporate their ideas to make them feel like they're part of the team. So at a core level, values are important, shared values, right? That's kind of foundational. And then from there, you do want to have people who have different opinions and beliefs, because those healthy challenges that are handled in a mature way can actually create better solutions to ideas or to problems that you have.
What do you say to the people who are on this who are going, okay, I'm not in a leadership role, I don't have direct reports, it's just me? What's one thing someone can do such that by doing it would increase a level of belonging for the people around them?
Yeah, I think the one thing you can do is be vulnerable. Be vulnerable with who you are, your shortcomings. Um, don't just always talk about your strengths. It's actually your weaknesses, your mistakes, your failures that get people more emotionally tied to you. I've done this more so over the past few years because I'm just, naturally be more open now than I was when I was younger, and I think it's extremely effective. I think it lowers people's guards. They trust you more, and because there's a reason why people love superheroes. They all have Achilles heels, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, you can connect with them on a human level. And so, if you want to form strong relationships with people and give them a sense of belonging, you need to talk about things that are not going as right or the mistakes that you've made.
Mm-hmm.
But not just saying the mistakes you've made, but saying like how you and maybe them can go about finding that solution together. I think the word together is really powerful when it comes to belonging.
Yeah. Let's talk about team's purpose. We in our conversations leading up to this, we asked a question. How do we help people get clear on the team's purpose and what fulfills people on an individual level? What can everybody begin doing immediately that would lead to people experiencing that?
The one way to get clear on your team's purpose, in my opinion, is to get to know your teams and teammates on a personal level. Because the more you understand about them, their unique situations, their life goals, their passions, their fears, their obstacles, what keeps them up at night, the more you can ensure that you can satisfy those fears, that you can promote those passions, that you can get them through their obstacles. And by helping them succeed, you in fact succeed by making their lives easier and supporting them and educating them and coaching them. That actually, all that time is an investment in them, and it makes them feel more connected to your organization as a result of that effort.
So my question for you who's listening, what are the conversations that are already in place on a weekly basis? For you leaders, do you already have one-on-ones scheduled? If you're just working with coworkers, is there some type of model or routine you're already in where you're engaging with these people? And what's the one tweak you could make that would lead to you having a deeper knowledge of who these people are on a personal level? What would that one thing be that you would do differently? I'm curious. Put your answers in the questions box. Kind of use this as a little mastermind. Where'd my questions box go? Amy says better follow-up. So what would that look like, Amy, out of curiosity? Glenn says almost. So Glenn, what would you have to do differently so that there was more of a consistent routine? Dan, I mean, you've done so much research in this area. What do you see being the biggest mistake that leaders are making?
The biggest mistake that leaders are making is, I think it's a lack of empathy. I think empathy is just one of the biggest topics, buzzwords in our society right now, because using technology all the time actually removes empathy. You want to lose empathy for someone else, you don't look at them face to face, you don't have phone calls with them, because a lot of the emotion happens over the phone and in person. And so because we've become more of a decentralized workplace where more and more people are working remote, so in our study we found that a third of the global workforce works remote often, because people are so spread and not getting the face time and are relying so much on the technology, which can be very useful. What's happened is it's removed empathy from the equation, so that leaders don't really have a sense of what people are going through on a daily basis, some of their struggles, because they're not seeing and hearing them. And most of our communication is nonverbal, 80%, right? So if you're not seeing and hearing someone for a long period of time, not only do people feel lonelier, but they don't feel heard. And if they're going through something, it's harder for the leader, or on the other end, it's harder for the employee to recognize what's going on because they're distant.
Yeah.
So what's really fascinating is that we all want more flexibility. In fact, people my age choose flexibility over healthcare coverage now, even though healthcare coverage keeps increasing in cost, and healthcare is the number one reason why people go broke in the United States. Even though there's that, people still want the flexibility. Yet the flexibility, especially remote work, prevents them from becoming as empathetic in many cases, especially if they do it full time, working at home, let's say, and it makes them more isolated, lonely, unhappy, and all that is bad for their health. So it's all really connected, and it's been really fascinating because I've worked remote for 8 years. So I even would say that, yeah, it has affected my ability to be empathetic. I've had to figure out how to make that work, team calls, in-person events. So I've switched up how I work and live because I've recognized that these things have happened, and part of that's happened because I've done all this research for the book.
Sheila had asked if video conferencing like Skype or Zoom, does that suffice? Does that help?
It helps for sure. It helps, but it's not enough. So the case, yeah. So I think what's really interesting is, multiple decades ago, it's either a phone call or an email. And now with video conferencing, at least you can see someone, and it's almost like they're there, but they're not there. So it does help because you get to see their facial expression and have a better sense of what they're going through, the emotion, a better understanding for their words based on their facial expressions and hand gestures. But it's not the same, right? Nothing will ever replace in person, ever. So I think that as we get more advanced technology, the advanced technology is becoming more personal. In Sweden they have chips that go in your hands and to activate, doors to get in offices and to buy lunch and so forth. And virtual reality has everyone at home in Japan with virtual reality girlfriends and working from home. And so what's fascinating is while the technology can make our life better and more functional and more productive and eliminate work we don't even want to do, we have to be careful because the more personal it gets, the more it comes into our life and becomes very personal to us, the more we can lose track of the human connections we need to function as humans. Because in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, part of our needs is to connect and have relationships. And if we don't have that, we won't be self-actualized. And if we feel isolated because we're always using this technology because it's easy, it's fun, it's addicting. Every time we hear an alert or see a notification on our phone, it releases dopamine, which pleases our reward system. So we want more and more, like a drug or a slot machine.
Yeah.
And because of that, all those dopamine hits, it's really hurting our brain and our ability to function. So that can't be good for us as well. So I think that, we need to be the masters of this technology and not be slaves to it. And I think that's the best way for us to use it in a way that's positive and not let it isolate us, not let it remove the empathy we need as leaders in order to properly connect with the team so that they get what they need and they're supported where they are.
I want to dive into how we can create connection, but before we do, I want to share some of the feedback. So we had asked what people's thoughts were the one thing they could do differently. Sheila said, ask better questions and hear their answers. Let's see. Haniel said weekly touch base, coffee with a different team member. Love that. Amy Strong. Hi, Amy. Have the first appointment and then do not schedule the second appointment before they leave. They need to schedule the second one immediately. Rodrigo says weekly check-ins to have clarity on the things that motivate our team members. Tony DeCello said that we can't motivate anyone. We can only remind them what motivates them. That's interesting. So there we go. Thanks for your engagement, guys. So I'm curious, there were 3 things that you had shared, Dan, when it comes to creating connection, things that we can do. What are some of those things?
Number 1 is teach an employee a new skill. So I have a whole chapter 3 in the book is practice shared learning. So the average relevancy of a learned skill is only 5 years. So in order to keep up with the speed of business, which is happening faster and faster every single day, we need to rely on each other, teach each other, and support each other's learning and development.
Say that part again. You said the average relevancy of a skill is 5 years?
Of a learned skill is 5 years.
What does that mean?
That means if you learn a skill today, in 5 years, it's going to be worth less to employers, if anything at all. That builds the case for needing to upskill and reskill the workforce. I'm not going to get so political, but we were supposed to have a jobs program, and that never happened. And part of the jobs program was to upskill the workforce so that they could be positioned for the jobs of the future and to fill the current skills gap. So we have about almost 7 million unfilled jobs in America right now, which is very high. And so we could fill those jobs. We just are not, we're not investing in people. We're not training people. And so companies are not growing as fast because they don't have the right people at the right time with the right skills. So the case I make in chapter 3 is, hey, let's help each other get these skills because we each have knowledge in certain areas and we can train people. And you can do something as simple as, if you read an article or a white paper or you hear a podcast, just share with your teammate freely. And by doing this, by getting into the act of doing this, especially if you're a leader, your employees will follow suit. And so that's how you create a culture of shared learning where people are learning and supporting each other. And to me, that is one solution for helping people advance and stay relevant in this economy.
I'm not sure if your research dove into this or not, but I'm curious. What are those skills that are timeless? Ones that as technology shifts, it's not going to be as susceptible to disruption. That if people here were to say, you want to live a life of extraordinary results, you got to master something. Let's master the things that are timeless. What are some of those things?
This is what I'll say that the thing that I've been thinking of nonstop in the past few months is I genuinely believe IQ becomes less relevant every single day, and EQ becomes more relevant every single day. Mm-hmm. So I think anytime I see someone with high,
for people who don't know what that is, explain.
EQ, the way I look at it is EQ is being able, it's like soft skills, right? Being able to manage and understand and work with people, managing tasks. It's all the things that can't be measured, and it's being relatable to people, understanding people, expressing emotion, those type of things. And then IQ is really your intellect. It's your ability to solve mathematical problems, for instance, test well in school. So EQ is becoming more important, and so I looked at what soft skills are the most important. Is communication. I mean, our ability to communicate with each other has never been more important. We all have to kind of communicate in order to sustain careers now and function in the workplace. Being able to prioritize work, I think that's a big one for everyone, right? Because it's not like we're working less hard than we did 20 years ago. So, we need to figure out what matters when and the energy we want to exert per task. Teamwork skills, we're on teams now, so to be able to function in a team is extremely important.
So I'm going to ask you to boil it down. Of all those, what's the one skill that makes all of them easier or unnecessary?
I think the most important skill is being able to work with other people. That's the most important skill. And I think that's why it's built the case for why everyone should have a service job when they grow up. That is the most important thing. Learning how to deal with people as a leader, as a manager, as a human, that will always become more important, and I think that we can't miss out on that. We can't miss out on the importance of dealing with other people, because in order to get anything you want in life, you need to work through other people to make that happen. Whether you're selling a product or service, whether you're in a team, whether you're a leader, regardless of what you're doing, whether you're in school and you're a student and you're trying to learn, you got to be able to get along with your classmates. Getting along and connecting with other people, that's to me is timeless and the foundation for anyone's career, because your network is your net worth. So I've built a career on relationships, and of course there are some skills that have helped me build those relationships, but at the core, the goal is build the relationships, because that network will serve you for the rest of your life.
Yep. So I'm curious, for the people who are here, if we're talking about being the one thing, being able to work well with others, let's ask you the focusing question. What's the one thing you can do such that by doing it would make everything else easier or unnecessary as it pertains to working well with others. I'm curious what you think that lead domino would be. Share it in the questions box. And it might be, it probably, we will have different answers. So this is not a universal answer. So I'm curious. Haniel shared something interesting. He said, is EQs becoming more valuable because of the lack of interaction due to an infrastructure that has ballooned? Yeah. Amen. Yeah, I'm looking at Cheryl's. How can that be communicated on a resume with algorithms choosing resumes? Ooh.
It can't, I don't think it really can. I think that's why interviews exist. The reason why people interview you is to see your soft skills, is to see the EQ, because everything else is already on paper.
That's a good point. I think the purpose of a resume is simply to get the interview. After that point, like at least when I look at our hiring process, we go back to the resume, not so much. It's once the resume is the filter for getting to the interview. And at that point forward, we're just following a process.
The resume is, can this person do the job?
Yeah.
The interview is, can this person do the job within this corporate culture and get along with people so that they don't cause havoc?
Yeah. So, by the way, like when we ask
can we put this person in front of our customers and will they be able to function in a sales pitch, let's say?
Yep. So we asked that focusing question, and that was a big question. And Aaron, I appreciate that you shared, I'm not sure. Something I learned from Gary is when you get asked big questions, it requires that you search for a big answer. And that was a big question. What's the one thing you can do such that by doing it would make everything else easier or unnecessary as it pertains to working well with others? And so, Aaron, my challenge to you would be schedule 5 minutes with a blank sheet of paper and challenge yourself to find 10 answers. We all hit that wall of I don't know. Push. That in itself is a valuable lesson. Let's see. I've got a question here. I'm curious where some of Dan's research is coming from. I guess I need to get the book. I'm interested in how his ideas on work would apply to higher education, especially for faculty, staff, and also students.
Yeah, great question. I actually was interviewed for an article focused on higher ed. Mm-hmm. The book obviously has a lot of research. I personally, through both my companies, I've conducted 45 studies interviewing 92,000 people in 20 countries. And then over the past 10 plus years, I have reviewed over 8,000 research studies. So it's primary, secondary research, and then I'm constantly having conversations with young leaders. I interviewed 100 top young leaders for the book, the top companies in the world. And then just on a regular basis, I'm talking to heads of HR at the Fortune 1000.
That's cool. So I'm curious, if we imagine that every single person on this webinar who's listening to the podcast later, and they just go, this is it for me. Like, I really want to play my role in changing the way that we interact and work. And they started focusing one thing at a time. What would be possible? What changes?
Yeah, I think changing one thing at a time is the right way of looking at it. I think people who have lofty goals, I have this one big New Year's resolution. Many do not reach that goal because they need to chop up the larger goal into smaller bits and pieces that are more manageable and less intimidating and stressful. Yeah. So I think that if you do a small task like putting your phone down in a meeting, that can actually have a huge impact because you're showing respect to your colleagues, you're attentive and present, and you're able to be aware of what's going on in the room, what other people have to say, who's presenting what. You'll be able to take notes, and you'll get a lot more out of the meeting. The meeting will be more functional, and you'll have better relationships with your teammates as a result.
What's the question that most people don't ask you that you really wish that they would?
I think the thing that people don't ask enough is motivations. Why are you doing this?
Tell me more.
Yeah, so I think from a mission standpoint, it's to help my generation through their whole career path, and in doing that, help everyone else and help make the workplace better and healthier and safer. I think in terms of motivation in general, I believe everyone who's highly motivated and ambitious has a light and a dark side of motivation, and the dark side is way more powerful. So if you see anyone who is the CEO of a top company or very successful in society, maybe even a celebrity, they might have the light side of dark. They'll display the light side of motivation, which could be giving to charity. It could be saying, I want to make the world a better place, and those type of lines, right? But I think there's also the dark side. And so while the light side for me is I want to serve and support other people, the old dark side of me was, because I was bullied growing up, it's this need to be validated. And so if you look at my 20s, winning the awards and all the press and all this stuff, a lot of that had to do with the need to be validated. And so you'll see that with most successful people, that whether they admit it or not, there is the dark side. And I think the dark side is way more powerful than the light side when it comes to motivating someone to put in the extra 5 hours every day, 7 days a week.
It's like selling painkillers versus selling vitamins. Great, you want to take vitamins, you're being proactive in your health, but the thing that people really like, when you experience pain, that's what I'm hearing you say, is that the dark side's likely coming from a source of pain.
Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to prove people wrong about you. So if everyone's like, you can't do it, and this is what happens with most entrepreneurs, you can't do it, your idea is dumb, and then they put in so much effort, there's so much, passion and work ethic, because you're trying to prove them wrong. Now, while proving them wrong, in a sense, comes from more of the dark side, the end product or service could really benefit people, and the money you make through that you could use in a very positive way. So again, light and dark side. And to me, that's something I've thought about for several months now, because I'm not asked too much about motivation, and yet at the same time, after releasing this book, I'm like, okay, why do I not feel as motivated as I did 5-10 years ago? And that's my conclusion, is I don't really have the dark side like I did once.
That's interesting. So I'm curious, when we talk about tapping into the motivations of people, it comes down to asking great questions. And Rodrigo just shared, I believe that to work with others, we need to have the skills to listen in order to establish good communication, then learn how to make or ask great questions. What, Dan, do you think about learning the skill of asking great questions? And what's the one thing that you would suggest that we do to develop that skill?
Man, this is very
Dan loves you, Rodrigo.
Yeah, he's right on target. And, I'm like the chief question officer. That's how I view myself now. Yeah, because if you look at my whole career, 45 studies, each study had 30 to 40 questions that I came up with. Plus, I've interviewed over 2,000 of the world's most successful people, and each of those interviews at least 5 questions. So all I'm doing really is asking questions. And so I think asking questions is the best way to learn, stay relevant, stay sharp, form relationships. And you can tell a lot about a friendship or a teammate or any type of relationship based on the questions that are asked or not asked of you. Meaning that if someone doesn't ask you questions, it tells you that they're more into themselves and maybe are narcissistic, and that the relationship is not really healthy. But if they're asking a lot about you, it shows that they care and they're interested, which tells you a story about them and the relationship you have.
So I'm curious. I'd love for people to give a little scale here on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is you're never asking the questions. You're always doing the talking. And 10 is you only ask questions. You're never doing the talking. Where would you rate yourself on that scale? Put a 1 to 10 in the questions box. And if you're listening to this later on the podcast, go ahead. You're going to have some silence here while we wait for the answers to come in. Think about it. Where do you really fall? All right. Amy says 8. Aaron says 6. Haniel says 6. Dan, what would you give yourself?
Oh, God.
Sheila got 5.5. I can tell. Sheila, you are detail-oriented. Cheryl's at 7.
I would say 7. 7. I don't want to overdo it, but I would say 7.
Oh, boy. I feel like I have become a 7, but my natural is a 3.
Why?
I naturally, like growing up, my natural state was I was in my head and I was promoting my agenda. And along my journey, as I surrounded myself with the right mentors and coaches, it just became so clear. The most successful people in the world, when I saw them, showed up looking to give rather than looking to get.
Yep.
They showed up not asking, how can you help me? They showed up asking, how can I help you? And then being in business with Gary Keller, and seeing what it looks like to build a coaching business. And now that we're building one as well behind the one thing, realizing the power of questions. And it's just, even though I think I'm smart, the people around me are so much smarter. Here, right here. It's right here. Oh, she didn't know she was going to be on camera today. Yeah. I'm far better off asking questions than I am telling.
Yeah, I agree with you what you said. And actually, in my last book, Promote Yourself, I had the 4 rules of relationships. Like this in Back to Human, it's the 4 factors or ways in order to create a high performing culture and increase employee engagement. But in Back to Human, it was 4 ways to build strong relationships, and one was giving. Giving is really the foundation for why I have a career, right? It's like, okay, how do I help X become more successful? And that takes studying the person, getting to know the person, asking questions, and really getting a sense for who they are and they want. And then if you're in a position where you can do something for them, connect them to someone, promote them and their product, that's going to make a big difference for them, and they'll be more likely to want to have another conversation with you, meet in person, get to know you better.
Yeah.
This is like core psychology. The more you ask, for most cases, the more you ask about someone, the more they become interested in you.
Be more interested than interesting.
They're doing all the talking.
Yeah. Yep. My mentor early on said, be more interested than interesting.
It's 100% true.
I tell my 5-year-old that on the way to the bus every day, actually.
Smart. I like that.
Yeah. If you ask her how she earns money, she'll say, I create value.
Scary, but cool.
Oh yeah. Can I share a tip? Something I did to move from a 3 to a 7 on the question. So we believe, there's an FM Alexander quote, people do not decide their futures, they decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. And so I was like, okay, I need a habit around question asking. And I just kept asking, what's the one thing I could do that would make asking questions easier or unnecessary? And I got to the point that my answer was, can I ask one question a day when I naturally would have told? And about 66 days in, because that's how long it takes to form a habit, it was just a lock. Like I just started asking more questions, and then I started creating games around it in meetings. I got this from Liz Wiseman, who wrote Multipliers. Play fewer chips. Like I will literally have a certain number of pens or pencils on one side of my computer, and every time I say something, instead of ask a question, I move it to the other side. And the people don't even know that I'm doing it, but I only give myself so many chips in a meeting to play, and it's real hard. So food for thought.
Love that.
What's a question we haven't asked you that we should?
Another one?
Another one. And by the way, for folks who are on here, I'm looking for questions, so feel free to feed some in.
Yeah, I guess from a personal standpoint, it's like, where do you and maybe even other people get their best ideas from? And so from the research,
you can't answer your own question. I have to ask it.
Oh, okay.
Dan, you're such a smart guy. Where do you get your ideas from?
So where I get my ideas from is different experiences, meeting different people, and being challenged with my ideas so that I can put forth more thoughtful responses and build from there. In terms of the research that I did for the book, this was really interesting. We asked, where does your creativity, where does your best ideas come from? And people said, in conversation with other people. So people bring out your best ideas.
Mm-hmm. I love that. My partner Jay was sharing, like, he sets goals around the number of books that he needs to read, because as a writer, he goes, in order to have output, I have to have input, which is why, like, I'll quick tour of his office. You got big bookcase there. You got books all here, books up there. They're everywhere. Got to have the input to have the output. All right, folks, what do you got? What questions do you have?
Well, also the best writers and producers and speakers are the best readers or consumers too. If you can, now again, if you only consume, that's a problem. But by consuming, you're being privy to new ideas, people. You know what's going on in the world, so you have a better sense of where you can fit in your industry, in your profession, in the world as a whole. Like, so I think, and by reading a lot, it helps, or consuming podcasts, it helps with your vocabulary and how you think, and
Yeah.
gives you some things that you can share, because you can not just share your work, but other people's work.
Well, speaking of being a consumer, Alan asked, what's one book besides yours that you would recommend?
I like Now Discover Your Strengths by Marcus Buckingham.
Hmm.
He wrote the foreword for Promote Yourself, actually, and he has a new book coming out soon about how, like, the issues that workplaces have, which I think will be interesting.
Hmm.
But Now Discover Your Strengths is important because I think, when you're younger, you're told to improve on your weaknesses, but what Marcus is saying is that you need to double down on your strengths. You can, improve your strengths way more than improve your weaknesses. So go all in on your strengths. And so the more I've recognized what I'm good at, the more I invest my energy in improving that and fine tuning it, because that's where I think I'll have my big career breaks.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Sheila asked, in interviewing top leaders, who's influenced you most and why?
Who's influenced me most? I really the one that immediately stands out, and I've interviewed so many different people, is Scooter Braun. I just think he's
Really?
really interesting. Yeah, I've interviewed him back in the day before he got too famous to interview.
So give
And
give people a sense of who he is if they don't know the name.
he's Justin Bieber's manager. Now he's Ariana Grande's manager. You know,
I was
prob-
totally going to tell a
probably a
Bieber joke.
billionaire at some point. But I think what's interesting about him, if you read my interview with him or see any of his other interviews, like at the Complex Media interview on YouTube, I think is really good. Lewis Howes, who's one of my peers, his interview with him is very good. And I really like him because when you talk with him, he's very real. He's genuine. He talked about, I remember back in the day, back when I lived, in Boston, I live in New York now. I was walking and I was talking with him, and he's like, yeah, we really struggled. No radio station was going to play us. We had to go to each radio station individually. They set the high music exec said that if you aren't a Disney Channel star, you have no chance at breaking.
Hmm.
And so he just talked about the struggle, and that was really cool because most people don't do that. And he still does now. So it's not like he did that when he was on the rise. He's still doing that now, even at his level. And so I like that. I like how real and genuine he was, and that he talked about all the struggles he had leading up to the point of where he was. And that's important because things are not easy. Things aren't even easy if you're a billionaire. Things aren't even easy if you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company.
No, the problems just get bigger.
The problems get bigger, but it's more so, there's always going to be problems. People are suffering even if they don't tell you they're suffering. And again, like I was saying at the beginning of the interview and webinar, was what binds us and connects us together is not really our strengths as much as is that we all have weaknesses. We all make mistakes. We all fail. And we have to be okay with failing and making mistakes. And it's something we all have in common besides, breathing and drinking water and eating.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Where can people find out more about your books?
Yeah, you can go to Amazon and type in Back to Human, Promote Yourself, Me 2.0. My website is danschawbel.com, DANSCHAWBEL.com. And my podcast is 5 Questions with Dan Schawbel, and I interview top people asking them 5 questions in under 10 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And a little bit about, there was one thing I was going to ask about. Nope, it's gone. Left the mind. Are you handing me something over there? Here we go. Question from Kaylin. If your workplace is overusing technology to connect, how do you make shifts in the culture toward better connection?
One leader at a time, especially at the top, right? So if you're the leader of your company or you have a small team, it's the daily actions that add up. It's as the leader, for instance, putting your phone in the middle of the boardroom table. And when you do that, other people will follow suit, right? So, an entry-level employee is not going to change corporate culture. Corporate culture is always changed from the top. So by changing your behavior, you'll set an example and be a role model for other people.
Although the other thing I would say, just from the corporate training that we have done, because it's not always the senior top implementing it, sometimes it is one person in the middle who does it with their team, and the team just starts producing results that frankly cannot be ignored. and they eventually look up and want to know what was going on. Another question, how has social media affected personal interactions, getting to know what people need specifically?
It can be used for good, because on social media you can get a better sense of who that person is, what their unique personal interests are, so you can deliver on that. So if you see someone, I'm just going to give you an example, at a Patriots game, and they work for you, maybe as part of their bonus, give them tickets to the Patriots game. So like, it can help you identify how to motivate and recognize somebody in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, like everything, it's a double-edged sword. So technology can be good or bad depending on how, when, and where you use it. And a lot of the leaders I interviewed for the book said that. So that's something that really resonated and made sense to me, especially. And so if you're using the technology as a way to have these shorter conversations, or to find out more about your employees so you can better service them, that intent can be very healthy and smart. But if you're using technology as a crutch in place of human interaction, phone calls, in-person meetings, that's when things become a problem. And it's very hard to establish a good working relationship when you don't see and hear someone for a long period of time. If I didn't see or hear, the people I work with for a long period of time, or even my customers for a long period of time, everything would fall apart.
Yeah, totally get it. Well, folks, Dan Schawbel, author of his new book, Back to Human, How Great Leaders Create Connection in the Age of Isolation. You can pick it up on Amazon. And one thing that we wanted to share, just because we've seen this from a connection standpoint, out of curiosity, how many of you have done a goal-setting retreat this year already? If so, go ahead and put a number 1 in the questions box. And if not, put a question mark. Number 1, if you have done a goal-setting retreat. And if you have not, do a question mark. Okay. Now, of the people who put a number 1, how many of you did it with someone else? With someone that mattered to you, whether that was a significant other, business partner, your team? If so, put a number 2. If you did it alone, put alone in the questions box. So this is something, it's just been such a passion of ours behind the scenes, because Jay and Wendy, Jay who co-authored the book, for over a decade, and his wife have been getting away and doing a goal-setting retreat. And we started bringing it to the public in the form of an event. If it's of interest, check out the training page on theonething.com and learn about the retreat, either the retreat or the master course, because I think, considering the time of year, if you haven't done this yet, doing the master course, that could completely change everything for this year. And we'd be remiss if we didn't tell you, because we just know the results that have been coming back in. So I wanted to share that. Awesome, Dan. Well, thank you so much. I remember the other thing I was going to ask you. Your Instagram, man, you got people on there. Where can people follow you?
Instagram is probably the number 1 place you can follow me. It's the one I actually update on a daily basis. 2 posts a day, 7 days a week. My handle is Dan Schawbel. And yeah, there's motivation, there's speeches, there's interviews, there's everything. It's a conglomerate of everything I'm working on.
See, I knew there was one thing. Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate you. And for everybody who made the investment of your time to join us live, we really appreciate you. We're wrapping a few minutes early, so you've got time to prep and be on time for your next commitment. We really appreciate you and look forward to being with you next time. Thanks all.